Electricity prices have increased 30% since January 2021. 30%, outpacing inflation and 13 times faster than the previous 7 years. Wow. So there are a couple of things. Voters responded to that people first energy policy. And the thing that we have learned, and I don't think we're ever going to get away from this now, economic policy and energy policy are inseparable.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy in the state of Colorado. I'm Jake Fogleman, joined as always by my co-host Amy Cooke. This week's episode is a little bit of a special episode because, as I'm sure everyone's aware, we just wrapped up another presidential election cycle. Big changes are afoot. There's going to be a brand new party in control of the White House and the Senate, and perhaps the House of Representatives, though we don't know that for a fact just yet. But anytime you have such a big shift in the political landscape, that of course opens up a whole host of new opportunities for policy changes. And that's sort of what we want to talk to you all about today. So Amy, what are some of your top line takeaways?
Yeah, so this was actually, I'm going to say this is a massive shift in policy, in the policy area in particular, energy policy that you and I spend so much time researching and delving into and analyzing and talking about. The difference between, so President-elect Trump, when he was candidate Trump, and even when he was president, when he was 45, right? I mean, I was on his transition team for EPA, and so we were charged with the agency action plan. And one of the things about President Trump was he made it very clear that we are the United States of America. We're the greatest country on earth. We are innovative, we're smart, and we can responsibly develop our natural resources and at the same time have a thriving economy. You could have clean air and clean water, and he proved it. I mean, the air quality got better, water quality got better. So, and he opened up BLM land for drilling. We had it was the final week of 2020 when the United States did not import a drop of oil. If you had said that in the 70s, people would have laughed at you, like, there's no way. So President Trump made it very clear in his first term that we were going to be energy, not just independent, we were going to be dominant. And the reason for that is not just, is it beneficial to Americans in their pocketbooks, but it's also beneficial to our allies, right? There's a geopolitical purpose to it. There's a national security purpose to it. If we're energy independent and then one step further, energy dominant, our allies then can look to us for their energy needs, for whatever it is that they need to power their economies. President Trump made that very clear. And so when we did the agency action plan for EPA, that it was all framed around that. We've now had 4 years under the Harris-Biden administration, which is what it is now. I mean, who's president right now? Nobody. I think Joe they said he spends a lot of time streaming Netflix shows. So whoever's in charge, but we'll go to the real one. Under the Biden-Harris administration, we have still been a country that is resource rich, but we have been a country that has been policy bankrupt. We have been investing, we've been pouring billions of taxpayer money into technology, I would say, into resources that are weather dependent, and they're expensive when it comes to actually powering a grid, predominantly wind and solar. And so with this election, the results we saw, and there were a couple of things on that. Americans overwhelmingly want a people first energy policy, meaning they think that their well-being should be ahead of carbon emissions. I can't say I blame them because we've proven we can do both.
Right.
But it can't just solely be carbon emissions, which is what the Biden administration, which Harris, Kamala Harris was obviously, as the vice president, and she made it very clear that she was an integral part of that. She was going to maintain the Biden-Harris administration's approach to energy, which is costly, as we've seen. In fact, over the last 4 years, I think it's the last 4, since January 2021, the price of electricity in the United States has gone up 30%, almost 30%. The previous 7 years before that, it had only gone up like 5%. I think, and I may have that wrong. I should pull that up just to make sure I have that exact. But it was electricity prices have increased 30% since January 2021. 30%, outpacing inflation, and 13 times faster than the previous 7 years. Wow. So there are a couple of things. People responded to that people first, voters responded to that people first energy policy. And the thing that we have learned, and I don't think we're ever going to get away from this now, economic policy and energy policy are inseparable. Yeah. They are now one and the same. Yep. You can't just take your lights for granted. And I'm going to point out one other thing before we get down to a macro level, or a micro level. So this is at the 100,000 foot level. President Trump made energy a cornerstone, and he talked about making it affordable. He talked about developing resources in the United States. And there are a couple of ways, and there are plenty of things that he can do to get that started. I'm sure we'll get to those. But there something else I want to point out. The control of the U.S. Senate went through 4 energy producing states. Think about it. West Virginia, right? Pennsylvania, Ohio, Montana. Yep. Places that have natural resources, and states where energy is part of their business, like it is their economy. And if everything holds, if all the leads hold, the one we're waiting on is Pennsylvania, they all hold, all 4 energy producing states flipped. They got rid of Manchin retired in West Virginia. He wasn't going to get elected. So West Virginia but Sherrod Brown was defeated by
Bernie Moreno.
Yeah, Bernie Moreno in Ohio. You have Dave McCormick, who is going to probably beat Bob Casey in Pennsylvania. And then in Montana, John Tester's going to be gone. Like, that is a seismic shift. All 4 energy, natural resource development states flipped to the GOP. So President Trump set this, we can do it all. And we've proven that we can. The GOP, many of those candidates ran on that, and they won. It was a winning message in this election.
Yeah, and I just do want to touch on something you said, because it's a constant theme that we talk about in this podcast, is energy and economic policy being so intertwined and so closely linked. I mean, how many polls did we see leading into this election that the economy was top of everyone's list on what they care about the most? And energy is so integral into economic growth, economic productivity, general well-being for citizenry. Inflation touches on things like electricity prices. And these are sort of the results that you might expect if people are upset with the status quo, how things are going with their pocketbooks and energy prices. Like you said, we're going to get down to a little bit of the more micro level, some of the particular policy things that you can expect. Obviously, it's still very early days, so it's tough to say with super specific platform points what exactly is going to be pursued. But I think there's some broad brushstrokes things that we can expect.
I think there are, and let's talk just a couple of let's drill down a little bit, if you don't mind, on some candidates and ballot issues, real quick that happened, and then where's Colorado in all of this? Yeah. Because Colorado did not vote for Donald Trump, although as part of the National Popular Vote Compact. Does this mean that they actually did?
You do have to wonder if the supporters of that are second-guessing that a little bit after.
It never occurred to them that they would lose the popular vote. So, so there are a couple of things. There are states that saw incumbent Democrats defeated because they either voted, they either opposed fossil fuels or reliable power, as we would say, and they were champions of things like carbon taxes or champions of offshore wind. So Massachusetts actually ousted a prominent supporter of offshore wind.
Wow.
And flipped a seat. Vermont flipped a couple of seats. And in fact, Vermont tossed the sitting chair of, I think it's their House Energy and Natural Resources Committee, because he supported a tax on heating fuels.
Oh, that's right.
So, yeah, people's bills are high enough, and now you're going to tax it because why? Emissions? And also, then it also in the state of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about it, these are blue states. These are not necessarily states that win for Trump.
Right.
These are blue states that where, especially at the level where it's your kitchen table, it meets your pocketbook. These are states where people are looking and going, wait a second, this guy, he's the one who increased my taxes. Forget it. I'm not. And you're writing the check every month for your utility bill. The state of Washington is interesting because the legislature put a ban on natural gas, future natural gas. So sorry if you like your natural gas appliances, you're not going to get them. Well, then there was a ballot measure, we call it the ban on the ban, to repeal the ban on natural gas in the state of Washington. And voters, if the lead holds at this point, voters voted to, voters said yes to natural gas appliances.
Right.
They want natural gas. So they're banning the ban, which we think is kind of funny. And actually the way they said, we're pro-choice in our in energy
sources. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a big one. Arizona is another kind of interesting one because Arizona elects what we would call our Public Utilities Commission. So they are elected there. It's the Arizona Corporation Commission, and they're charged our PUC is a shell of what it used to be, and that isn't necessarily because of the state legislature. It's because of who has been appointed and then how they have been confirmed. But the Arizona Corporation Commission is a separate entity. It's a separate state entity, and they are the regulators. They regulate utilities. They do some other things, but utility regulation is their main purpose, and they are a vertically integrated system. So they elect their commissioners, and there are 5 of them, and there were 2 open seats and 1 incumbent who was running, and the GOP swept all of those. So you have a conservative, I would say a people first utility commission now in Arizona, where and they recently just adopted language that if you shut down a baseload plant, that's what you're going to do. You have to replace it with baseload.
Wow.
So it has to be reliable. And this was the other thing too, it has to be some of the lowest cost. And that includes, sort of that levelized cost. So which we would call it the least cost for deliverable power. But what they're saying is baseload for baseload. So you can't just go overbuilding on wind and solar and just start harvesting all of those subsidies. Here's what they'll do. They'll shut down the coal. Then they build new wind and solar. They get the return on the investment, and then they harvest all those subsidies. And the ACC is now saying, no, you got to do baseload for baseload. So we've seen some of those developments come at the state level. And then I do want to, can I mention a bright spot in Colorado?
Sure. I was just going to ask you about it, yeah.
Yeah, so because it's also the House district that we're in.
Yeah.
So House District 50 up in Greeley, so it's Weld County, it's in Greeley. 18 years it has been held by the Democrats, and it has gotten progressively more anti-oil and gas. Mm-hmm. And this latest one, Finally, the GOP looks to have flipped it. Now, I have to say, I couldn't vote in Colorado. I'm still a registered voter in North Carolina. That'll change in 2025. But it looks like Ryan Gonzalez is going to, he was the challenger, is going to defeat Mary Young. Again, if the lead holds,
Right.
it's going to defeat Mary Young. Mary Young is she was appointed and then got elected, and she took over her husband Dave Young's seat, who you might recognize is the state treasurer. And from what I understand, a lot of political heavy hitters came up because they were worried about the race and knocking on doors for her. But it looks like Ryan Gonzalez, who may be one of the youngest elected members of the State House, they'll finally flip that seat. And the reason, I think, in part, is his support for oil and gas industry. Mary Young said if she had her way, she said, personally, I'd eliminate hydraulic fracturing. I mean, that's a bad message in Weld County.
Yeah.
You don't say that out loud. It was also, I mean, it got Rochelle Galindo into trouble. That's why Rochelle Galindo, the recall was initiated about her, because she was less than honest on the campaign trail. But Ryan, is Mary Young said it, and he campaigned on it. And Weld County, you're not going to find, it's not big oil. It's not like we're sitting on mansions and everything, or these huge fields of oil and gas. But what it is a lot of the oil and gas workers.
Yep.
It's where the guys who work in the fields, it's the guys who are running the trucks, it's the guys, these are the guys that are out there working. It's what, what do we call it? It's the muscle generation.
Right.
They're the people who are doing things and producing things. And finally, I think that seat's gonna flip.
And one more thing on that point, on the Senate side is Kevin Priola.
That's right. Oh my God, how could I forget that?
So the former Republican Kevin Priola, who became a Democrat, switched parties, representing part of Weld County, famously, as we talked about several episodes ago, introduced a bill to ban the oil and gas industry in 2030. His seat is going to be filled by a Republican. A Weld County Republican is going to take that seat.
That's right. Scott Bright is going to take that seat. And that was my husband John's seat.
Yeah.
And when they redistricted, when they drew the lines again, they put that portion of, that sliver, it's like the Highway 85 corridor, they put it in with Kevin Priola. I mean, and of course he flipped. I mean, you couldn't get anybody more anti-reliable, affordable power, anybody more anti the industry on which Weld County relies for tax revenue than Kevin Priola. He was absolutely the worst fit. I don't think he ever came up into Weld County. Certainly didn't come to Greeley. So yes, now Scott Bright and hopefully Ryan Gonzalez, somebody who actually supports the industry that Weld County relies on. And Greeley, by the way, Greeley schools, the city of Greeley, Ames Community College, the revenue from that industry matters.
Yep.
So yeah, so those were some bright spots throughout states. And the point being, I guess, to put a bow on all of this, people, the well-being of Americans is now inseparable from the energy and economic policy. They will no longer be considered completely different. They are one and the same. As we have seen the rise in the price of energy, it has driven inflation on everything else because energy is in everything. Energy is the new economic paradigm. The question was, well, Donald Trump said he was going to lower prices as soon, day one. And somebody said, how? He said, we're going to make energy cheaper. How do you do that? Well, you're going to start developing it right here in the United States. You can employ people, and you don't have and you'll have reliable, affordable power, so you don't have to overbuild wind and solar. I mean, this is great news for Americans. Colorado may be, even though we have two bright spots, Colorado may be a little different.
I was going to say, yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that other than those two bright spots, it's pretty much status quo at the state legislature. So probably business as usual, I would guess, going forward in the next couple of years.
I think that's true.
Yeah, and who's to say with that, if there's some extra dialing up, turning the nozzle up to 11 because of who's in the White House, as sort of a backlash to that, you may see something like that. So that's something to definitely keep our eyes open for.
I think there's something else too. Two things. One is we're going to have a new Senate president. We don't know who that'll be. If it is Faith Winter, I don't think we'll have any positive movement on energy policy. We'll still have a very restrictive energy policy that focuses on emissions and not on Coloradans. But the other thing is Colorado elected officials are going to have to own all of it, because there will be no boogeyman at the EPA or DOE. There just won't be. It is going to be the opposite of that, in fact. I think what we're going to find is Colorado is going to be, when it comes to energy, it's going to be like a deserted island, because we'll be surrounded by states that are producing energy that is much more affordable and reliable. So we're going to have to interconnect to Wyoming or Utah or someplace, because it'll be unacceptable to not have reliable power. But you can expect that Colorado will double down, because they're going to, the smart people in Colorado are going to try and prove that you can power a grid on wind, solar, and batteries, even though it's never been done anywhere. It's never happened. But they're going to try and prove that it's right. And when all the proverbial stuff hits the fan, they'll all be out of power. They'll all be gone, and we'll be left to clean it up to pay for it.
It is a great point about sort of being the island going forward, at least for the next 4 years. It makes a great case study to see what every other state is doing and Colorado's approach, and the conflict of visions will bear their fruit, and we'll see who was right in the end.
Because I'd like to know how Coloradans are going to pay for $22 billion of infrastructure that XL needs. Yeah. How are they going to pay that?
Oh, that's a good point.
Do the math. 1.5. You guys can do it out there. Take $22 billion and divide it by 1.5 million, and it's not a pretty picture. Now, we know there's a difference between commercial, residential, and industrial.
Sure.
Those will be different. But I've done the math. $13,750, and they want to do this over 5 years to build out the infrastructure for AI and facilities and data centers. I don't know how anyone approves. I don't know how the PUC approves that with any. I mean, if you have a moral conscience, you cannot approve that. So anyway, Colorado, it will be in an interesting spot.
Yeah, and that's just the start. That $22 billion, by the way, like you said, it's just 5 years. Oh, yeah. That's just for 5 years of spending.
By the way, that's on top of things like the Fenberg rider and all of the other stuff. So yeah.
As we're coming up on time here, Amy, did you have any other topics you wanted to hit or takeaways for the listeners?
Real quick, I think day one, you're going to see things like, and this will be fun because we can watch the leftist activists, the anti-fossil fuel activists' heads explode, I hope. Watch for things like Keystone XL. I think you're going to see the pipeline, you'll see pipeline being built. I think you'll see BLM land a little bit more accessible to natural resource development. I'd also like to see, I think offshore wind is going to be yanked. I think if you noticed, renewable stocks, wind and solar stocks plummeted today.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
LNG exports are probably going to go.
Yes. Yep. I think Alaska is probably going to be the happiest because they have felt locked down under this administration. So I think you're going to see that. And I think you'll see a stop to putting giant industrial wind turbines and giant industrial solar farms on BLM land going for blanketing BLM land with solar farms and giant wind turbines. So those are just a few quick things. And permitting reform we might see. So, and we'll see if they can tackle the quote, the Inflation Reduction Act. We have called it the Inflation Production Act, but we'll see if they're able. Hopefully, they're able to tackle that. It would depend on whether or not Republicans get a majority in the in the House, and it'll also depend on, I got to tell you, the backbones of elected officials. I don't think you need the backbone from Donald Trump. I think you'll need it from some elected officials. So.
Yeah, especially in some of the swing districts where some
yeah.
of that government money's going and they don't want to give up that sweet, sweet pork.
Right.
Yeah.
Like Weld County, where, by the way, a whole lot of solar farms are being built in Weld County. We'll have to do a show on that because I've started pulling some documents.
Yeah, that'll be a good future show topic. You want to leave a just quick 3 takeaways, or do we wrap it up pretty nicely there?
Yeah, well, I'll real quick. I'll say U.S. energy policy, this is at the macro level. American energy policy will be people first. I think you're going to see that going forward. Colorado is going to be an island. It's going to be, we're going to, I would think of it almost as a desert island. Like that depressive energy scarcity narrative will be prominent in Colorado, whereas the rest of the country is going to be superabundance. And then because of that, get your generator now.
But that does it for us on another episode of PowerGab. If you like what you saw here, you can head on over to iitv.org to check out our entire back catalog. We produce new episodes every single week. We're also available wherever you might get your audio podcasts, whether that's Spotify or Apple. And if you want to suggest future show topics or guests that you'd like us to hear us interview, send those over to info@powergab.org. We'd love to hear from you guys. But until next week, we'll see you.